Welcome to Just SA, the Climate Justice Sessions. This is the space where we talk all things climate justice, social equity, and economic transformation. On today's episode, we have the South African Presidential Climate Commission, and we're joined by Mr. Blessing Manale, who is the Head of Communications and Outreaches at the PCC. We're talking about how the role of climate justice has been woven into government policy as well as regulations. Join us on this episode as we unpack what the role of the state is and its role in making sure that justice is equitable around climate change, but also showcasing their voice in how they're supporting communities around climate justice. So welcome to Just SA. Welcome to Just SA, the Climate Justice Sessions. My name is Sentle Nell. This is the space where we talk all things climate justice, economic transformation, as well as social justice. Today we have a special treat. We're joined by Mr. Blessing Manale, who is the Head of Communications and Outreaches at the South African Presidential Climate Commission, the PCC. We're talking about how climate justice has been woven into some of the policies and regulations around South Africa's climate actions, but also the importance of governance. Please join us for this incredible episode. Dr. Manale, welcome to Just SA, the Climate Justice Sessions.
Thanks. I look forward to a great discussion with you.
You know, it's been so interesting, just the evolution of this show. And the pleasure of having the PCC on here has been so important. But I think for the benefit of our community, please can you share with us what exactly is the Presidential Climate Commission and what it does?
Well, thanks. In brief, the Presidential Climate Commission is an advisory body constituted by the President in 2020, just after the National Jobs Summit, to advise government, but broadly all of society on the kind of economic transformative path we must undertake as we transition into a low-carbon economy.
Okay.
And a low-carbon economy basically means using less natural resources, polluting less, to still achieve optimal social and economic development. And that's what the Commission is. We are composed by diverse stakeholders, government, civil society, labor, business. And the commission is run by a secretariat, very able young men and women, a few of us old, of course. And we basically make sure that the commissioners take the best decisions based on the best science and the best information and feedback from stakeholders. But I must say it's not as easy as it is, because some of the advice and the recommendations we sometimes make are either not palatable to government or the partners think that they've been softened down and they don't communicate a stronger message for social justice. So all in all, we're permanently in the state of creating consensus on what climate justice and the just transition should be for South Africa.
So you're basically the interlocker between sort of the stakeholders that are in the space and the state, basically, in making sure that climate justice is proliferated alongside all the spheres of government. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, yes, that's half the answer right. So you get 50% for that, because it's not only the state. I've said in society, because unlike normal statecraft or the running of government and politics, in climate change, the key economic and underlying factor is the economy. So you can advise government as much as you can, but ultimately the economic players are the private sector, workers, and the communities that every day either work in those industries or get the pollution or continue to think of new ways of survival. So you've got to advise ultimately. But government is an enabler. So if government does not listen, no one else can do anything. So I give you back 25%.
Wonderful. I'm going up. And I think, Mr. Manale, a lot of the jargon surrounding climate change gets very technical. There are lots of abbreviations. So I've got a few sort of technical words or ideas that I want you to sort of unpack for us. The first one is the nationally determined contributions, or commonly known as NDCs. Again, for the benefit of our community, what does NDC mean, or what are NDCs?
Well, nationally determined contributions are mainly commitments we make as a country towards capping our greenhouse gas emissions. So we basically, and greenhouse gas emissions are the gases that affect our environment, the atmosphere, being emitted from certain industries, from driving cars, from generating electricity in the coal power stations, from cattle and cows and sheep fatting, unfortunately. So but also from fertilizers that releases other gas, from gases that comes from waste when we burn waste in the landfill sites, or the excess methane that we allow to go out. So those things ultimately, those gases to be kept, constitute once you've agreed as to how much of that gas we can release based on our needs, then that determines your NDC, your targets.
Okay.
And those targets are every country that is signatory to the Paris Agreement, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has got an NDC.
Okay.
And it must revise it every 5 years. And good question, because this year are supposed to be submitting a new NDC, and the country is excited about whether will we set up more ambitious targets, will we keep the same targets. The environmentalists are saying if you keep the same targets, you will not solve the global crisis. The economists are saying you will make the country poor. And society is saying we've got to have a better world, whatever you do.
And so in determining those contributions, my understanding is that it's very collaborative. And so you've got various stakeholders that then say, actually, let's look at what our methane looks like versus the fertilizers that are, contributing. So is it very collaborative, or is it a state of just send us what you think the determinations should be, and then, different bodies decide? It's
very collaborative, and it is very consultative. What the PCC has started doing, and let me start by saying that the responsible state department for the NDCs is the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. So they're the ones that must deposit or submit the NDCs to the Secretariat of the United Nations every 5 years. But to do that, they've got to talk to society. And the PCC plays that role. We go out, and even before we start saying what do you want the targets to be, we actually go out to youth, to women, to farmers, and ask the same question of us: do you know what an NDC is? Do you know what it means if we put up a higher or a lower ambition NDCs? And then ultimately, when they understand what is that, then you've got to then start saying, what can you do? Some would say, no, I don't have money to transition. I cannot change from coal tomorrow. Then you say, what do you need? I need new skills, I need new money, I need workers to accept, I need to finish off my coal contract. So the negotiations comes into what can you give and what can you take. Correct. But ultimately, we've got global commitments. So we balance that with the fact that we're not alone in the world.
And the local context, right? Which is important.
Yes.
So the next ones are mitigation and adaptation. What do those two mean?
Well, mitigation basically means to solve the problem before it happens. You identify to prevent it, yes. So mitigation measures would be reducing our coal-fired power station, for example, or moving to electric cars, or going to smart agriculture that does not use more fertilizers, you know. But it also means putting more solar panels, because what's the purpose of using an electric car but you are charging it from a coal-generated electricity, you know. So those kind of things. And then adaptation would basically, and resilience, we always add resilience. How do you make sure that when the impacts come, you are ready for them? But how do you make sure that where you can still adjust, you do that? Like, how do you build stronger bridges? How do you make sure that your planning does not put people in low flood lines, you know? But adaptation also means how do you respond when the crisis and the impact hit? I mean, you have seen Umtata in the Eastern Cape. We're still grumbling the impacts of the KZN floods. The Northern Cape and the Free State farmers are complaining about their crops. It can also mean in adaptation beginning to say that I need heat-resistant crops. So you may stop having to plant watermelons and just decide, oh, cannabis is the way to go.
And the hemp industry is big as well, right? So how do we make sure people adapt and pivot in that sense? The next one you touched on a bit, and it's a bit long, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC.
Yes.
What does that stand for, and what does it mean?
Well, the UN system, or the multilateral system, it's governed by conventions depending on the issue that they are addressing. So in the environment sector is actually one of the sector with more than 200 what you would call multilateral environmental agreements, MEAs. So you'll have the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on Marine Protected Areas, then the Convention on Climate Change, which is the UNFCCC. And it was agreed to, and its predecessor, people would remember things like the Kyoto Protocol.
Yes.
Yeah, so its predecessor is the Kyoto Protocol. And you'd call it a protocol because not many people have signed it, or it is still voluntary. So it becomes a convention when people sign into it and commit to it. Okay. So it's a stronger instrument than a protocol or a charter.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's basically an agreement between polluting and non-polluting countries in the atmospheric space that says we'll do the following things to reduce and limit our greenhouse gas emissions. But ultimately, it's about keeping global temperature rises to not above 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050.
That's ambitious.
We've got to be damn ambitious. We're burning, we're drowning, and our buildings are being swept over.
Yeah. Do you think we'll make it as South Africa?
We must make it as the world, because globally, we think we will make it. We're not going to make it less ambitious. That's what we're hearing from society.
Okay.
We don't want to lower the target because we are already missing certain of those targets in any way. So if you have got a long distance to go, you don't start saying it's far, let me rest.
Yeah.
You run faster because you actually could see that you've lost some lap time.
Correct.
But in running, chasing up that lap time, don't over dehydrate. You must still have water as you run. You must still fill your muscles. You must not get drowsy. And that's what the discussion is about. In this pace, what other things must we be on the lookout for, Yeah.
And I think it goes back to that preparedness as well, right? And then the last one, every year, Mr. Manale, we hear about COP, Conference of the Parties.
Yes.
What is COP and why does it take place every year and why is it important?
Well, the Conference of Parties is actually the meetings of the signatories to the convention, to the UNFCCC. The signatories would mean member states, countries. But because the world is not governed by governments alone, COP, it's also inclusive of civil society, of business, and they come there for all kinds of things, to lobby their positions. Last year, COP was in Azerbaijan. The previous year, it was in Dubai, and the other year was in Sharm el-Sheikh. So it also rotates in the regions. And this year, the 30th Conference of Parties will go to Belém in Amazonia in Brazil. And I think we must say that South Africa once hosted a COP, by the way.
In Durban.
In Durban, COP 17. But because it was not, the COP cycle works on a negotiating cycle and a stock-taking cycle.
Okay.
So what came out of Durban, the agreement was called the Durban Accord. What came out of Paris 10 years ago was the Paris Agreement. So actually COP30 is actually a revision also of 10 years since COP. And that's what it is. They can make pronouncements, the COPs, they can say we're making stock, but civil society and a lot of other people all over the world are saying you keep on gathering, but we're not changing. We're not seeing the change.
Yes.
So the success of the COP depends on to a larger extent who's hosting it and what do they come out of there, and that must be reasonable and what the world can buy into.
And I think part of it is also understanding the role of institutions like the PCC, right, in facilitating and supporting, even from a local domestic standpoint. So I'm interested, how does the PCC then support municipalities, donors, or stakeholders in making sure that the proliferation of, for example, our Climate Act of South Africa is done in an equitable and fair way?
Well, we are the watchdog, and I'm happy you're raising the Climate Change Act. It's also the DFFE is the administering entity, the executive authority of the Act, which means the Minister of Forestry Fisheries, Mr. Dion George, is responsible for that. But ultimately, the Act says South African society must do this, and the PCC, by looking into the Act, even before the Act, we started seeing certain challenges and constraints in municipalities and civil society society in readying themselves for the just energy transition. So the first step we did was to actually go and say, let's just look into what local government capacity is. Okay. And we work with local government associations, SALGA very well. And we started a project called the Just Energy Municipal Support Program to start saying to municipalities, you're going to wake up tomorrow and find out that no one is buying electricity from you, not because they're connecting illegally, because they've got solar panels.
Yeah, and they've gone off grid.
Off grid, and you don't have money, you can't generate resources, Or you're going to have a bunch of electrical engineers in the city that does nothing because they are heavy current electricity and the whole city is run on microgrids. So you've got to think of the skills of new revenue, but also you must start thinking, how can you make municipal buses run on electric vehicles? They'll save you on diesel. You use that money to repair the potholes in the township. So, and that's how simple it can get. But it can also get as complex as to whether anyone wants to borrow a poor municipality money to buy electric buses. So it's also about governance. So that's at the local government. With civil society and community organizations, they don't have the business skills. I'm sure you, Sentle, can wake up tomorrow, take your laptop. If you've got a great idea, fundraise for a new episode for your podcast. You've got a woman in the township with a great idea who can generate waste into energy, but she cannot do a page longer of a business plan. So you've got to go to them, give them capacity. But also link them up with donors. Yes. And the same with donors. Say to donors, you've got easy money. You're not asking for somebody to be credit worthy. You just want integrity, buy-in, and governance. Here is a person, talk to them. So that's what we do. But we also go in big and say to donors, the money you're putting into the country is not changing anything, so use it better. And to government, we basically sometimes go and say, pull up your socks. And that's what has happened with Komati Power Station. Where we would say, and I don't like saying, but I would say government has left the show.
Sure.
Where there is economic diversification and the communities are left to their own devices because the power station closed and it was the anchor of their economic
and the entire ecosystem around.
Yes, the taxi driver sees lesser passengers. The lady that was cooking sees her dumbolo not being bought.
And what's the uptake and the feedback like? I mean, you talk about the importance of making sure that these stakeholders are speaking to each other and there's an interlocker factor. But what's the feedback like when you speak to donors, to communities and municipalities? Do they understand the role of the PCC? Is there an engagement in wanting to find out more information? What's your sense of that feedback?
Well, the PCC has been broadly well received. I think the challenge when we started was people and a lot of stakeholders did not understand what we do for various reasons. So a youth organization would think that you are a great thing for them to start a youth project. And when you tell them we're advisory, they tell you, no, but when we knock at government's door, they don't open. When we knock at the big industries, the corporate social investment manager tell us that, no, that's not in their plans, So we come to the PCC. But others come to you to just say, please tell us how to do a poster. I want to teach my school kids about climate change as a grade 7 teacher. But then you've got negative feedback also where people say these ideas are from the West. We cannot afford them. Or you've got business saying that you think that we're in the business of making society better and the business of making profit. But then you've got business that says we are meeting up our environmental social governance. We want to cut out our electricity consumption, and banks saying we will not finance dirty industries. So it's a mixed bag of reactions, but it's more about risk and opportunity. I don't think anyone in the world wants to see Earth collapses.
Absolutely.
But people sometimes think I won't be there in 2000,
So it's up to you.
Until you wake up and discover that you're 80 and this is a decision you could have taken differently 40 years ago.
Correct.
I mean, I never planned to live beyond 21 and here am I crawling into pension.
Crawling into pension. One of the cornerstones of climate justice and the reason why we have this show is to make sure that marginalized voices are heard, but also that there is in-depth stakeholder participation. And so from a climate justice perspective, how is the PCC making sure that active participation is taking place, that our communities aren't falling into the trap of stakeholder fatigue, but also that there's continuous communication that's taking place? How do you balance that?
Well, indeed, I mean, I don't like stakeholder fatigue because you cannot keep on consulting and consulting. It becomes a cycle of talk shows. And the feedback we've received in many communities that when we talk, you must come give us feedback or you must come to troubleshoot our problems. You don't keep us feeding information. We are tired.
Yeah.
But also because we can't understand this information. So we've, as the PCC, found ways, dynamic ways of engaging communities. And one of them is your podcast. We've put in some money into community radio.
Yeah.
We've started saying to artists and to township young people, talk to your local hardware to give you paint, to paint your the dirty wall as you enter the town, to say climate action now, instead of hanging around a shopping corner because you're looking for a job, So we're trying to find innovative ways of engaging all sectors. We're talking to the sports fraternity to say, wouldn't it be great in one of the biggest soccer matches in South Africa where the flag just says climate action now, So people can understand that sometimes you must only kick the ball and not the grass when you're in the field for the environment's sake. So that's how simple we're trying to make the message. But Sentle, I must say we're fighting disinformation.
Yeah, and that's the point I want us to unpack in Adaptation Manale, because there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation. So how do we bridge this understanding gap? Because to your point, there's a lot of people that are also anti-climate change that still are talking in smoke and mirrors of saying it doesn't exist. But we see the reality in our country. We see what's happening in the Eastern Cape and KZN. And so how do we make sure that the language, one, is simplified, that there's also demystification, like we've just done with some of the terms, that takes place? And do you think it's just the PCC's responsibility, or is it collective responsibility?
It should be our collective responsibility, and the PCC should actually be, because we don't have the resources and the machinery to do that, should just be the one doing the thinking and saying there is a gap here. Teachers don't understand this matter. Or there is a gap here. The taxi industry think that will eat up into their customer base if we put up. So we cannot do it alone. But we've got to also, and the misinformation is also informed by anxiety. If somebody is told that you lose your job if the solar panel comes through, they'll not listen to anything else that tells them that they'll pay cheaper electricity because they'll not have the salary to pay for cheaper electricity. So it's driven by by what we call denialism. People that just says these are acts of Allah or God or whoever, or these are the natural processes. Yes, it happened 2,000 years ago. It will happen again. Then you've got the delayists that says it's real, it's happening, but not too soon. Let's wait. Yeah. And those are the people that don't want to do anything until they die. Yeah. That's what I call them. Somebody that says, I'll do it when I'm dead. Basically saying it will be the next generation's problem. Those are the most dangerous ones because they're basically saying to future generations, will mess up the earth for you. Yeah. Those that are in denial have got genuine concerns. They don't understand.
And it's linked to fear as well.
Yeah, it's linked to fear. So you can convince them, show them the opportunities, but be real and honest. Because also don't be a misinformationist by exaggerating the problem, a doomsday, to say tomorrow there will be a great wave that will wipe out the entire Mafikeng. Yeah. People will then know that it's a lie.
So what about the individuals that then, to your point, yes, they're delayists, but also don't think it's a priority? I think sometimes from a South African context, we always like to think in silos, to say, no, education first, health first, climate change, we'll see it later, right? How do you then convince someone that we can actually walk and chew at the same time? We can have issues related to education, health, climate change, poverty, all of that is in one. Do you think there's avenues for sort of inculcating that culture? Or is a siloed approach what we know and what we'll always stick to?
Look, we've got to preach integration and simplify it. And I think that if society sees what it means for them tomorrow, they'll buy in. You need to be able to start saying to an insurance lawyer, tomorrow you'll be sitting in court arguing about whether you must pay somebody's house that has been destroyed by floods or by a criminal, So they start understanding, so there is room for new studies in insurance law. You've got to go to a banker and say that tomorrow when you give money for a petrol station, you must understand that in 5 years you might not be able to get your money back because that person people will no more be buying petrol. Then they'll start seeing why it means, So it's and then they'll see the integration. So the transport ministry will talk to the economic ministry and will talk to the Ministry of Education, But that should happen. But as long as we speak the high jargon of greenhouse gas emissions and gigatons, and whatever we talk on in these COPs, people still think that it can happen tomorrow and not today.
Yeah. So this sounds like a huge task that requires a lot of money, Tatemana.
Yes.
And I'm curious, because South Africa is a developing nation by many ways, but we're also actively invested around climate action and climate justice. From a finances standpoint, where is this money coming from? Where are we tapping into globally and domestically to make sure that the proliferation of the just energy transition, but also climate justice takes place? You know, what do those mechanisms look like from a domestic and global standpoint?
Well, indeed, finance and investment is the biggest thing. And at each and every COP, somebody commits not less money, more money. The challenge is that money, sometimes it comes with conditionalities. It comes too little, too late. It is caught up in bureaucracy, or the preconditions are basically the soul of your own country.
Sure.
You know? So it's a balance, or sometimes it has got no money to match it. So there are discussions about blended finance. How do you use private money and public money? You know, how do you use the same money of workers who have invested in, for example, in pension funds, and use it to invest in green industry, so that when the coal mine closes, the workers themselves own the solar farm. But you've got to have, and the financial sector is one of the most conservative sectors. I mean, you've been keeping paper money for I don't know how many years. You still don't understand what is Bitcoin without promoting any particular cryptocurrency. So it's a very, very conservative sector. And what you've got to do, you've got to make it agile to understand, because as long as the sector still is risk averse, you'll not be able to get the money. But domestically, it means that you've got to put in efficiencies and prioritize.
Correct.
As I said, if government wants to drive a new electric vehicle industry in South Africa, it must, by the next 5 years, say that no government car would accept the traffic cops and the police who needs faster cars should be an electric car. Why does a messenger from one office block to the other block needs a 6-cylinder car? You know, so you know that the 500,000 vehicles, all with the coat of arms and with provincial hospitals, are electric cars. So you've got to also start doing this, so that you've got to domesticate the value chain and make sure, but also manufacture domestically. So it's all those kind of things,
Sure. And it's an interesting one, because even when you look at the mechanisms tied to finance, the issue of justice again comes up. And we can unpack it in its different forms: procedural, redistributive, and even from a gender perspective. How inclusive do you think the justice streamlines have justice streamlines rather been very inclusive in as far as the policies that we have, or the Climate Act?
Look, I mean, generally, because of this kind of class outlook for society, redistributive justice is an economic struggle. It's not a boardroom struggle. You know, restorative justice is a on the ground struggle, because you've got to go to the mining company and say that my health needs to be the same way it was before you polluted the air.
Correct.
You know, what we seem to be good at, and the PCC, because we do not implement, it's easier for us to champion and to lead on procedural justice, to facilitate dialogue, to make sure that people have got access to information, they understand it, they are given social impact studies of projects in time, they're included in the policy making, because that's what procedural means. But it means making sure that you don't call a meeting when you know that Sentle is picking up her daughter at school, because you're excluding her from a gender perspective. Or you don't call a meeting on Sunday afternoon when you know that all Abu Gogo, they are in a church service, you're excluding them. So you've got to be socially conscious. And what we've seen in the climate space is that corporates continue to consult as if from their own comfort zones. You know, you tell people that the bus will pick you up at this corner to go to this community hall, but you don't appreciate the fact that the taxi industry is not going to allow a bus to come and pick up people and take them to back on payday, because that's the only time they make optimum. So it's things that but you need to understand society. So a lot of the PCC team, we spend in understanding the simple things that universities and the ivory towers of higher learning don't teach us. Because that's how you engage with society, by just understanding the basic needs of engagement. And I think we're getting there. But we've got to empower them with podcasts that are easy accessible, that
Correct.
don't need licenses, that are low data, that they can watch over and over again with Zulu subtitles. I'm very not happy that you've not even spoken to me in any other local language except saying Tate Manale, when I can speak 6 South African languages.
Okay, as khulumeke Baba Manale. As khulumeke. So when we talk about climate justice, on a personal note, why is this work important to you? Why do you think balilekile, and for our country and in your personal life, why is climate justice important?
Well, I mean, for me, it's important because, I mean, my father worked in a smelter for ages. He came back home with TB to die. So for me, it's personal. But I've seen my grandmother with pylons running over her yard, but still using a primer stove or a brembaola. Sure. So it's that. But I've seen decisions being taken about where to put a tar road instead of a solar panel in my township without being consulted. So that's how elementary justice is, you know. But I've also seen my kids going to school to learn the wrong curriculum, which they'll not use in 10 years, you know, where we continue to invest in infrastructure that's not safe, where we continue to not regulate certain industries, where we continue to invest in things that would not make us a richer nation. So for me, justice is about a better life, and so it's about me. It's not waking up and going to work.
Yeah.
It's about breathing in and breathing out.
Yeah, it's personal.
Yes.
For someone listening and interested, one in the work that the PCC does, but also curious about why they should be engaged in climate justice, what's your parting shot?
Well, nothing should happen about you without you. That's why they must be part of it.
Yeah. Sure. Aptly said. Dr. Manale, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing, and for also giving us perspectives, one from the PCC, but also the importance that we have and the voice that we have as citizens in making sure that the proliferation of climate justice takes place. Siabo.
Thank you.
Thank you.